Hi, welcome. Thank you, Navjeet, for having me on Dr. Pai's channel. And today we're going to talk about Atmakaraka. Did you want to say anything before we start?
I want to say hi to all the viewers and welcome to Barry Rosen. Thank you for taking out the time to prepare this presentation and come to our channel and discuss about Atmakaraka. And I'm really excited and to learn about what it really means when we have different planets as our Atmakaraka and what are our soul lessons to learn and what are our gifts that we're coming in with.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're going to cover all of that. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in Vedic astrology since 1988, and I've been actively teaching classes online. Some of them are advanced even over the last 6 years. I have a blog on Facebook and on appliedvedicastrology.com and written 5 books. But anyway, I'm easily reachable at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com, and we'll bring this up later again. I usually start with a little chanting, get the gods on our side, so we'll just do that. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Vakritunda Mahakaya, Suryakoti Samaprapa, Nirigam Kurame Deva, Sarvakaresha Sarvada, Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bunaktu Sahaviryam Karavahai, Tejasvina Vatitamastu Ma Vivishai Vahai, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Om Aditaye Samaye Mangalai Buraye Cha, Guru Shri Krishni Vishta Rahavekitave Namaha, Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrichoma, Amritam Gamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. So again, I want to acknowledge a lot of my teachers that have contributed to this lesson: Robert Koch, Andrew Frost, Camilla Sutton, Sanjay Roth, and Visti Larson. Here's a copy of my latest book, Finding Your Blind Spots Using Vedic Astrology. I have a class coming out on that also that's in much more detailed and rich. But let's go to today's topic of Atmakaraka. So the Atmakaraka comes from Jaimini astrology, and there are in the Charakaraka schemes, and it's based on the planet with the highest number of degrees in the chart, or the lowest number if it's Rahu, is considered the Atmakaraka. And the Atmakaraka is the king of the chart, and he's the guiding planet for lessons of this incarnation. He creates difficult lessons so we learn what we're supposed to do in this lifetime. He's like the first lord in terms of his importance, but he's really more like the 8th lord because he brings the deepest karma from past lives that we need to work on. So sometimes people misinterpret Atmakaraka as being like the ascendant ruler, and it's much richer and much more important because it governs the soul's purpose on this incarnation. And it brings kind of lessons, and it tends to cause the most suffering in the chart. And sometimes I talk about it first because it's actually the elephant in the room, and people know the suffering of their Atmakaraka. Sometimes it's relationship, or sometimes it's money, or whatever it is. But it's the elephant in the room, really. And I often start my consultations talking about it because it really helps them understand why they've come for this incarnation. It does create a lot of mental distress sometimes. Sometimes if the Atmakaraka is conjunct the ascendant lord, or if it's in the nakshatra of the ascendant lord, then there can be great spiritual advancement for the native. So we'll talk in more detail about how to decide if the Atmakaraka is really difficult or if it's going to bring a lot of soul advancement. Again, it's the reason we were born, and that's why we really have to kind of treat it really importantly. And again, Rahu, in the scheme that I've studied, Rahu can be the Atmakaraka. In this case, you subtract 30 degrees from what Rahu is to figure out where it goes. So like usually if Rahu is like 0 to 3 degrees or 0 to 5 degrees, and there's no other planet that's higher, like at 25 degrees or you know, something like that, then the Atmakaraka can be Rahu, and it is important. So an example for that, if let's say you thought your Atmakaraka was Saturn because it was at 25 degrees, but you have Rahu at 3 degrees Scorpio, then the Atmakaraka would be Rahu, because you subtract 30 from 3 and you get 27. It would have higher degrees than maybe your Saturn at 25. Now we can rotate the whole chart around the Atmakaraka and make it the Lagna and read the chart that way. And this is something that's kind of fascinating. I always used to think we could. I always used to think we could only look at the Atmakaraka in the Navamsha chart. And there's a special chart for that, the Karakamsha and Navamsha chart. But actually, we can do this in the Rashi chart, in the main chart also. And so, for example, my Atmakaraka is Saturn, and it's in Libra. And if we rotate the chart, I'm like Libra rising with Saturn in the first, you know, that, and it puts Jupiter in my 9th house. And so by rotating the chart around the Atmakaraka, we see I have a prominent Jupiter in the 9th house, which is why I've been really spent my whole life involved being in spiritual teaching and teaching astrology and things like that. But it's perspective that you see from the soul, from the Atmakaraka, which isn't nearly as strong in my chart when you look at it from the natal chart. And the Atmakaraka even gives us motivation to stay alive, because, you know, it's the sole job of the Atmakaraka is to get us enlightened. It actually, you know, it wants moksha for us, and will create difficult problems and challenges for us so that we can get through our relative karma so that we can get enlightened. We can also even, this is something newer that I recently learned, we can also look at if we look at the planets that are 6th and 8th from the Atmakaraka in the Rashi chart, and they will show us the debts that we've come into the world to pay. So for example, my sun is in the 6th house from the Atmakaraka in Pisces, and it reinforces kind of some struggles sometimes I have with status and work and business at times in my life, because it's a debt that I need to pay from past karma. So the debts of this life are seen 6th and 8th from the Atmakaraka in the Rashi chart. And the 6th house may be more, more difficult. The 8th house sometimes, we always think the 8th house debts are more problematic, and they are, but the 6th house debts are actually somehow more difficult because we're more conscious of them. Also planets in the 5th and the 9th from the Atmakaraka in the Rashi chart may also show us something about our life. For example, the 5th house, is the house of judgment. If we have good judgment, 5th house, the Karka for the 5th house is Jupiter. If we have good judgment, we don't make a lot of mistakes in our life. I always used to just look at the 5th house from the Rashi chart, and we don't like to see malefics in the 5th house from the Rashi chart, but also from the Atmakaraka. Now, if we have Mars, 5th house from the Atmakaraka or in the Rashi chart, then we may create too much conflict in our life. Mars is always wanting to fight. If we have Saturn in the 5th house from the Atmakaraka or the Rashi chart, we may have trouble remembering past mistakes. Ketu is headless if it's 5th from the Atmakaraka, so it has trouble planning, so nothing ever happens in one's life. Or we have Rahu 5th from the Atmakaraka, we're too obsessed with and dreaming about things that aren't going to happen. We don't see things very clearly. So the 5th house, I always teach my students, is one aspect of our mind and our judgment, whether we learn from our past mistakes. And the 5th house from the Atmakaraka is also important for whether we, can get through life. And so again, it's another way of rotating the chart. The Atmakaraka, I sometimes can be what's called a twisted Karaka. In a sense that, we know the Karakas, we know like Jupiter governs knowledge and wisdom and teaching, and it governs children, and it governs gurus. And the Atmakaraka, because it's connected to the 1st and the 8th houses, to me, it's a term that I've coined. It's like a twisted Karaka. It means that we're kind of have these blind spots about it. We have difficult lessons to learn about it. And as we know with the 8th house, they're kind of unconscious. We don't always see the blind spots. We have a lot of suffering from the 8th house and our blind spots to the 8th house, but we don't really, we don't always see it. And so, for example, my Atmakaraka is in the 12th house, and so I have, and it's Saturn, and Saturn is connected to, the ancient Vedas would say servants. I have an exalted Saturn in the 12th, and the Vedic texts say, oh, I have a lot of servants. And it's true. At times I've had 9 employees working for me, and I have a lot of modern term today would be employees, not servants. And because the Atmakaraka is opposed to Mars in Aries, I always have had lots of challenges with employees, and it's like a deep challenge in my life, and it's the lesson of Saturn in the Atmakaraka. And sometimes, how about the so if your sun has the highest number of degrees in your chart, let's say it's at 27, 28, 29 degrees, and has higher degrees than any other planet in your chart. If the sun is the Atmakaraka, then it's like, again, if we look at it as a twisted Karaka, the Karaka, the sun is about confidence, it's about leadership, it's about fame and firepower, and we all enjoy those things. Now, when the sun's the Atmakaraka, depending on what's aspecting it, what houses it goes, and it may be kind of twisted. We may actually need to learn lessons about humility and overcoming pride and self-importance. It's pride, not price. So the dark side of the Atmakaraka the dark side of the Karaka comes out. So it's kind of like it's twisted. It doesn't see, the sun wants fame, it wants power, and yet it may not see that it's like an overbearing boss, or that it's power hungry, or it's so intent on being out of balance about getting fame that it doesn't treat one's wife very well, or one's spouse very well. I have a friend who has Sun Atmakaraka, and it's exalted, and he's so powerful. It's because he's like a king, or maybe he was a king in a past life, and he throws out so many solar flares whenever you're with him, that you feel like you're getting burned up and you kind of want to run away. And it's not that he's absolutely brilliant. He's like the king, with the exalted Sun Atmakaraka in the 9th house. He has all this wisdom, but he doesn't see his blind spot, how he shows up. And so you end up kind of wanting to run away from him. And he's actually been struggling in certain ways, even with an exalted Sun in the 9th house, for a Leo. I mean, sometimes the dark side of the Atmakaraka come out. So sometimes when we evaluate the Atmakaraka, if it's afflicted, let's say by another malefic, if it's in a difficult house, like the 12th house for the sun, or if it's in Libra, or Aquarius, where the sun has a lot of dignity, then the darker side of the Atmakaraka may come out. It may lack focus and organization and discipline, may have ego issues, may have issues with father, maybe have an overbearing boss at work, and it has to learn to overcome self-importance and self-aggrandizement. That's why I always look at the Atmakaraka. It's like a twisted Karaka. It's like, we love the king, we love our leader, we love our bosses, but if our boss is a little bit twisted and doesn't see that he's overbearing, or he's into self-aggrandizement, then we don't like to be around them. I just realized that if you have questions, I've moved the you might have to ask them on the chat, but it's okay. I'm gonna just unmute you for a second. And do you have any questions so far?
No, so far we're good. We're good so far.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna mute you again. So if the moon is the Atmakaraka, I think this is a difficult one, because the moon changes signs every 2.5 days. And what's the moon about? It's about searching for happiness. It's about being compassionate and sensitive. So if you have Moon Atmakaraka, you actually have to learn how to be more compassionate and more sensitive to others. And it's a very hard thing to do. So the Atmakaraka lessons are really hard for us to do, and because we may be blind to them because they're connected to the 8th house, or we just, it's just the hardest thing for us to do. And so, how do you teach somebody to be compassionate and sensitive? I mean, they almost have to go, take classes, or, just, from many difficult lessons that come out of this, they may eventually get it. There's a continual search with Moon Atmakaraka for peace of mind and desire to find happiness, because the moon wants happiness. It's the Karaka for happiness, and it's also about peace of mind. And so Moon Atmakaraka particularly has to take up meditation practice. Otherwise, they're just, they're also a little bit emotionally imbalanced, I find, especially if the moon's afflicted. And so easy for the moon to be afflicted, and particularly if it's in Scorpio, or the 6 days of the 12 houses, or conjunct Mars or Saturn or Rahu. So we're getting aspects by them. So the other thing about Moon Atmakaraka is that for a man, if he has Moon Atmakaraka, he may have a weakness for married women and get into too many affairs. Again, they're searching for happiness. If you think the next moon person, the next married woman I have an affair with will bring me happiness, but it's just a perpetual kind of conveyor belt that never kind of ends. The other thing is, I find Moon Atmakaraka can have unstable emotions that run their lives. That means they're, especially if the moon's afflicted, they're always searching for happiness, and they can't get a handle on their emotions, and they have problems with home and family life, because moon is, Moon and Cancer is connected to family and married life, and so Moon Atmakaraka may have just innate problems with marriage because they're restless. They're searching for another woman or another partner. Now, Mars Atmakaraka is kind of interesting. We have to learn how to practice nonviolence in speech and action, and to be humble and accept defeat. Now, Mars is used to winning, and it's used to kind of fighting, and so the twisted Atmakaraka aspect of it has to do the opposite. It has to be nonviolent. It has to, in both speech and action. Now, today, a lot of people don't have trouble with being nonviolent in action. I mean, we do have a major problem with violence in our society, and I suppose we could have twisted Mars Atmakaraka there, but or twisted Mars there for sure. But we can fly off the handle with our speech, and so we have to kind of curb our angry speech, curb our violent speech toward others, and not harm others when we have Mars Atmakaraka. I mean, Mars has a lot of firepower, and it has to learn how to harness that energy in service for others. The highest aspect of Mars is service to the king, service, in the military, service to the guru. And when it's out of balance, Mars is a mess. And so Mars Atmakaraka has to learn how to deal with repressed anger and to channel its energy and firepower to help mankind, and that solves the problem. Sometimes if Mars is very afflicted, like in Cancer or in Aquarius, which are particularly bad signs for Mars, or if it has difficult aspects from K2, it may give laziness and negative thinking and weakness of the nerves and lack of energy and physical strength. They may need to sleep a lot. Now, this is more true if Mars is very afflicted by Saturn, or if it's in the sign of Cancer, or in maybe in a Mars Nakshatra. But it tends to, that can be the dark side of Mars. It doesn't have energy. Mars naturally has lots of energy. Mars Atmakaraka may be gifted, may be cursed with having little energy and being lazy, and has to rise up to move through its laziness, and get physical and go to the gym. Mercury Atmakaraka. Now, Mercury Atmakaraka has to learn to speak the truth and communicate that which is uplifting to others, and avoiding gossiping. So when Mercury is out of balance, it tends to gossip, and we know where that gets people. You end up losing a lot of friends because they hear about what you said about them. So you have to kind of, Mercury Atmakaraka has to speak the truth directly, and has to uplift people and not get into gossiping. Mercury Atmakaraka can be over analyzing if Mercury is weak, particularly in if it's in the 4th house, it tends to be over analytical. So we have to move more. Mercury has to learn to move more into its heart. I often send people with Mercury Atmakaraka to Toastmasters. They need to learn how to communicate more clearly. They need to take speaking classes. And again, the things that we have trouble with are the things that we don't want to do. We tend to do the things that we're good at, that we have gifts. And we have an exalted Atmakaraka, maybe like exalted Mercury in Varga Atmakaraka, well placed in the 1st house where it has Digbala. Then it may, it won't need Toastmasters, but it still may have some subtle lessons about it. But Mercury is very afflicted, like in Pisces or Cancer. It may really need to learn how to speak, and as I recommend speaking classes. They may have a lot of problems with friends due to miscommunication. I have an ex-friend who has Mercury Atmakaraka and in the 12th house, and the person has a way of misunderstanding all their friends, and then they get angry and they break off relationships with them. And I've seen the person go through 20 friends, or 20 ex-friends, because they're not willing to bend their ego to make up with it. So it's lessons about friendship. Mercury is the Karaka for friendship. Twisted Mercury has trouble with friends in friendship, and it has problems. Again, Mercury is like a child. Sometimes it's the prince. It's kind of when it's afflicted, it may be sexually overactive. We always use the analogy of the prince being too sexually active in the kingdom because he's just very immature. That could be a problem with Mercury Atmakaraka. Maybe irresponsible and have a superficial mind or the ability to learn and focus. So again, if Mercury were afflicted by Saturn or K2 or something like that, they may have learning disabilities, and that's part of Mercury Atmakaraka, learning to kind of embrace, put the extra effort into speaking clearly, learning, and not being lazy about learning. So those are all important things to know. Any more questions? I just pause for questions real quickly. I just unmuted you.
Just 2 questions. So,
yeah.
Atmakaraka being weak versus exalted or powerful, how is it going to affect the person versus being it in the difficult houses like 6th, 8th, or 12th house?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to come to that a little bit later in the talk, but I will talk about it. So obviously, we'd rather have an exalted Atmakaraka than a debilitated Atmakaraka, but it's not like it won't still give problems. Again, like everything in Vedic astrology, we have the planet in a nakshatra, where it's in the navamsha chart, what house it's in, and so there's always like an infinite number of possibilities. But like I said, I gave the example. Let's say if you have Mercury Atmakaraka exalted in the 1st house, where it has Digbala and Virgo or something, in your Virgo rising, it will have a lot of energy to complete its mission because it may have some distortions. Maybe it has some problems with friends, or maybe it has some problems with speaking, because there's always some affliction somewhere in the charts. But it may have more strength to deal with the problems. And I've seen people with like Saturn Atmakaraka in the 1st, debilitated in Aries. Now we know Saturn in the 1st in Aries is just a very difficult placement anyway. But Saturn Atmakaraka in the 1st, the person has really deep suffering. They're very lazy. They can barely get out of bed and go to work. And Saturn's about working. Saturn Atmakaraka debilitated in Aries just doesn't. It's just even too lazy to get up out of bed and work, or if they end up working a lot of menial jobs and not getting paid enough. And so they have a lot of lessons to learn about work and being responsible. So I think if the planet is strong, the lessons may not be as difficult as if it's weak. Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's quite fascinating. I've been studying this for about 8 years. I've just been satisfied, and I've done it mostly through examples. No one writes a lot about this, but it's just like everything in the chart. Okay, Jupiter Atmakaraka. Jupiter has to learn how to protect children. Jupiter is the Karaka for children and teaching, and being a good parent. Even our mother's our first teacher, right? So Jupiter Atmakaraka usually has to learn how to protect children, be a good parent, and be a good teacher. And they often lack confidence as teachers and parents, and they don't trust their abilities. And my wife has Jupiter Atmakaraka in the first house, and it's got Digbala, and she's like the best teacher ever. And everybody is amazed what her speaking and teaching is like, but she somehow shies away from doing it and lacks confidence and doesn't do it very much. So Jupiter Atmakaraka usually just has to go out there and realize that they are good at teaching and they need to do it. Jupiter Atmakaraka can have problems with gurus and husbands and children. Again, the Karaka for Jupiter is Jupiter's the guru or the husband or the child, and when they don't have problems with teaching, which may not all be the case, Jupiter Atmakaraka, they usually have difficult problems with children, or they can't accept their husband. So Jupiter Atmakaraka can also, if it's afflicted, be a know-it-all. Sometimes in Gemini, it could be a know-it-all, or in certain signs, it can be a know-it-all. And so it has to learn how to be humble in helping others. I mean, a good teacher, if you've had a teacher that says, well, let me show you how to do it right, you don't want to listen to them, because they have a lot of ego in their energy. But we like teachers that are a little more humble. But sometimes we don't trust teachers that are humble because they don't have enough confidence. So, we can get all these twisted aspects of Jupiter with Jupiter Atmakaraka sometimes. If Jupiter is very afflicted, again, we don't like it in Capricorn. We don't like it really in Virgo. We don't really like it in Aquarius. Well, Aquarius actually, Jupiter is good in Aquarius, but Libra and Taurus Jupiter, I think, really has kind of twisted judgment. It tends to be prone to wrong judgment, lacking faith. They have to learn how to overcome being too judgmental. I find Jupiter Atmakaraka in Libra and Taurus particularly, they have a lot of false optimism, and they're not able to judge the truth, and they get into trouble, and they trust people too much, and then they get into trouble. And so Jupiter Atmakaraka particularly in those signs might have trouble learning to be discriminating with people, and they have to learn how to listen and to be more tolerant. I mean, I think we have a whole problem in our society now where people are fighting with each other and they don't listen to each other anymore, and I'm right and you're wrong, and it's a really huge problem in our society today, and the whole world's being divided about this. And it didn't used to be like this, but Jupiter Atmakaraka can have this problem, particularly I think in Libra or Taurus, where they just get, I'm right and I'm not going to listen to you and you're wrong. That's the kind of the bad judgment from Jupiter that we don't like. We don't see that in Jupiter and Capricorn too. Venus Atmakaraka. Venus Atmakaraka has to learn control of the physical passions and excessive sensual desires. So, Venus governs sex and sexual and the wives of men, and when we have Venus Atmakaraka, we may have not learned in past lives to control our passions, and we get into affairs or relationships too quickly, and it blows up on us, and then we're never happy, so we keep looking for another sexual relationship to kind of jump into. So we have to learn how to accept our imperfect spouses and curb our sexual energies with Venus Atmakaraka. This would be particularly true if Venus Atmakaraka were in Virgo, where we tend to be very critical of our spouses, and we may be oversexed anyway, but that's a particularly bad example. Sometimes there's lots of battles around love and emotion with Venus Atmakaraka. Again, it's all about Venus. The Karaka for Venus is relationship. Venus Atmakaraka has to learn about relationships. So it may have spent a whole lifetime changing partners, getting divorced, going through multiple partners in its quest for a perfect partner, and get very frustrated. So it's a very deep karma. I find, by the way, that these Atmakaraka lessons, I don't know how quick. I find that people don't learn them very quickly. And I'm age 67. I still struggle with my Saturn Atmakaraka lessons, and I think they're there a whole life. And I think to really get to the end of them takes a lot of discipline and insight. To me, it's like the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray from 1993. If you haven't seen that movie, watch it again. You know, it's just like he goes through 40 lifetimes in that life until he, you know, he learns not to be selfish, and he learns how to be artistic and help people. And it's a very beautiful movie about our growth. And the Atmakaraka, I think, is like, you know, Bill Murray in that movie. You know, it's teaching us that to get it right, we've got to keep, you know, we've got to be, you know, Venus Atmakaraka has to be kind, it has to be compassionate, it has to be a good listener, it has to not jump into sexual relationships too quickly, it has to learn how to give and take in relationship. And those are deep, hard lessons for Venus Atmakaraka. Rahu Atmakaraka. Now, some of the people who teach Atmakaraka, there's K.N. Rao has a 7-scheme system. He does not include Rahu. Sanjay Rath from the Orissa tradition does include Rahu. From experience in working with people's charts, I find that Rahu, if people have Atmakaraka, it's very real and it should be looked at. And Rahu, of course, is a very very real energies like the other planets. You know, it's just a little bit more out of control. So, what's Rahu about? Rahu is about swindling and cheating and being unethical. And if you have Rahu Atmakaraka, you have, you know, maybe you were swindling people in previous lives, and now in this life you need to suffer by the deception of others, and you find yourself being cheated and betrayed, and you have to learn how to be honest and straightforward is the lesson. So you have to live a life of being honest and straightforward, and you have to look out for being betrayed and gullible and deceived. And yet it may happen. I mean, first Rahu Atmakaraka person I did, you know, the person was, you know, his business partner had, you know, had swindled him, and he had lost his whole business. And, you know, it was a very kind of painful lesson for him. But this is the type of lesson that Rahu Atmakaraka can give sometimes. Surprises, unexpected betrayals, disloyalties, thefts. And the other thing, the other problem with Rahu is, you know, it's too ambitious, and it will get there by hook or crook. You know, we have that problem with our politicians. They'll do anything to get to the top. You know, they'll steal any amount of money, and problem of corruption all around the world. And this is kind of a Rahu Atmakaraka problem, where you're just too ambitious and too ethical, and you just lose your sense of what's right for society. So you have to kind of be aware of those problems. And there's many types of Rahu Atmakaraka, because Rahu is always connected with the sign. If Rahu either becomes most like the planet it's conjunct, or the planet that aspects it the most, or the sign that it's in. So we can have 8 kinds of Rahu Atmakaraka. You can have Rahu Atmakaraka connected to Jupiter, which may have lessons about knowledge and gurus, and you could have Venus, Rahu Venus Atmakaraka, which may have more lessons around sexual obsessions and things like that. So it's very, very kind of complicated and fascinating. Now, Saturn Atmakaraka, which is the one I know best, Saturn is mine. Saturn is the Karaka for suffering and pain and sorrow, right? So if you have Saturn Atmakaraka in your chart, you need to share the sorrows of many others and support them. So again, it's like Moon Atmakaraka. We have to learn to be compassionate. We have to kind of like, Saturn can be cruel, you know, if it's not compassionate. It can say, oh, your problem, you know, I'm not dealing with it. But actually, Saturn Atmakaraka has to get in there and help others and deal with other people's sorrows. Now, as a Jyotishi, I naturally am doing that. So maybe I think I work through my Saturn Atmakaraka. But sometimes, you know, I realize I still could be judgmental about people with problems. But on the other hand, I've gotten so tired of running in to try to fix and help people that I have to watch that tendency. So it's a real fine line, razor's edge. You may also have had a past incarnation where you violated the freedoms of others and suffered, and now you must help others through their suffering. So, you know, again, sometimes we can understand the past lives from the Atmakaraka, because if we weren't very, you know, with Rahu Atmakaraka, if we weren't if we were kind of a swindler and a cheat in past lives, then now we have to go through that this life. And if Saturn Atmakaraka in past lives, if we controlled others, Saturn likes to be controlling. If we controlled others too much, and created suffering by controlling them and dictating what they did, then now we have to suffer from them. Now, I have a bunch of case studies. I'm going to focus a little bit more on Saturn Atmakaraka for my case studies. I have a lot of case studies for Saturn Atmakaraka. Before I go into the case studies and then how we judge the Atmakaraka, because by the houses, the aspects, the nakshatras, do you have any questions? I'm going to unmute you.
So good question. Just when you mentioned about Saturn Atmakaraka, what if someone's Atmakaraka is conjunct Saturn? Will they have the these, like, what can that be applied? What is talked about Saturn Atmakaraka?
Yeah, it depends what houses might be involved and what rising signs involved, because Saturn is a good planet for Taurus and Libra, and so it may have, but it's a really good question. The planet that the Atmakaraka is conjunct, the houses that it's in, aspects to the Atmakaraka, the nakshatra that's the Atmakaraka is in, they all influence the lessons. So again, we gave some very general ideas here, and to diagnose specifically what is happening, you have to look at, like everything in Jyotish, you have to look at 5 or 6 things. You have to look at, the dignity, the house that it's in, the aspects, the nakshatra, the placement in the navamsha chart, and all of those will give us additional information. So I will get into that a little bit later in the talk, but good question. Okay. Okay. So here's a case. Here's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's one of my heroes, and I didn't realize until we both have exalted Saturn Atmakaraka. She wrote a number of books on death and dying, and she would interview people who were on the operating table and who came back to life after the surgeon saved them, and they would report on what they saw in the afterlife, and they all reported similar things. So she documented life after death, and she had a life of helping refugees from World War II. She was in Switzerland during World War II, and she was helping people from Nazi Germany escape into Switzerland. She also, her Atmakaraka is very strong. Let's look at her chart real quickly. Okay, so she's Aquarius rising, ruled by Saturn, and she's got Jupiter in the first house, which is Digbala and has a lot of strength there for teaching. And Jupiter actually does well in Aquarius. And Saturn's in the 9th house, which is the best. It's a Bodhika house. Her Saturn is almost at the exact same degree as mine is, and really funny that I like her so much. There are lessons for her. I mean, she did have a lot of, she had to emigrate from her home country, from Germany into Switzerland, and she ended up emigrating a number of times in her life, and that's kind of a 9th house thing, on a 12th house thing also, with Aquarius owning the 1st and the 12th houses. But in this case, the Atmakaraka is very strong. It's got an aspect from Jupiter to it. In Gemini astrology, Taurus aspects Libra, so Venus is aspect. So it's got 2 benefic aspects to the Atmakaraka. It's in the auspicious 9th house. It's in, I think it's in Gemini Navamsha here. No, it's in Libra. No, I don't have the Navamsha chart up here, but it would be in Gemini Navamsha. So in this case, this Saturn Atmakaraka has a lot of dignity. It's exalted. It's got 2 benefic aspects. It's in a good house, and she had some struggles with the Atmakaraka, but she helped people. She was helping refugees in World War II, and she was doing the type of thing that Saturn Atmakaraka needs to do. So I think she quickly learned her Saturn Atmakaraka lessons. We'll get into other examples in a minute, but Saturn is the planet of hard work, and so Saturn Atmakaraka people often have extremely hard work by their nature. I mean, I work 70 hours a week. My dad also. Lucille Ball has Saturn Atmakaraka. We'll look at her chart in a minute. she did live audience productions for 6 years. Can you imagine? You know, I don't know. You know, television doesn't do that anymore because you can't make any mistakes. You've got to perfectly rehearse every moment because you can't. You know, you're in a live audience. Although I guess they were edited afterwards, but again, it was still kind of a big thing. Saturn is also the planet of responsibility, and Saturn Atmakaraka has to be responsible beyond the call of duty. I know I don't have any trouble with that. And Saturn Atmakaraka can be lonely because it has to endure sadness and pain of loneliness. Now, Saturn is also a key planet connected to karmic health issues. So Saturn Atmakaraka people may endure their share of health challenges. And again, firsthand, I can say that I understand all of these things. I'm extremely responsible. I work 70 hours a week, which may be not so great. It's a little bit out of balance. I have Saturn Atmakaraka in the 12th house. I have been lonely and sad in my life at certain parts of my life. And I have had a good share of karmic health issues. And those are things that come with Saturn Atmakaraka. Let's look at Lucille Ball's chart. Everybody knows I love Lucy. When I saw this chart for the first time, I was surprised. You know, she has Saturn Atmakaraka at 26 degrees Aries. So her Atmakaraka is debilitated. It's in the 5th house with Mars and Rahu, 2 other malefics. Mars is a good planet for her Lord of the Fifth and the Fifth, which gave her all that creativity for television and made her a great comedian. Rahu probably helped exaggerate that and gave her a lot of creativity. So the Mars Rahu isn't so bad, but the Saturn Atmakaraka, I mean, she was a workaholic. She had trouble with her children. Her romances, you know, she had, we loved her as a TV comedian and I Love Lucy, but off the camera, you know, she had trouble with her husband who was an alcoholic. They eventually got a divorce. So her romance was a mess. Her children, one of her son became had drug problems. You know, those are the type of things you see with Saturn Atmakaraka. It's in the 5th house, so she's going to have karmic issues with children. She's got the workaholic issues, and in this case, it's hard work because she did it. She became very famous and wealthy. She did the hard work, but it wasn't like it was easy. I think there's a lot of suffering in her marriage and her romance in the 5th house with her children. I think when her children didn't see her enough because she was working all the time. She and her husband built this incredible studio, Desilu Productions, which made all her favorite shows, Andy of Mayberry and number of Mission Impossible. They went on to be incredibly important in the television industry, but it was with incredible hard work, and there's a lot of suffering with it. Marriage suffered. Okay. Saturn and the Sun. Now, Andrew Foss gave a very brilliant lecture on the connection between Sun and Saturn. The Sun has Digbala in the east, you know, which is the 10th house. Saturn has Digbala in the west, in the 7th house. And when Saturn Atmakaraka is always looking at the Sun because, you know, east and west are the opposite directions. This is kind of advanced Jaimini Jyotish. This is kind of very fascinating. But so Saturn gets a lot of power. Saturn Atmakaraka people, one of the benefits of Saturn Atmakaraka people, they have a lot of solar energy. They have a lot of positive solar energy. In a sense, they take on the positive energy of the Sun in having a lot of firepower. Something I realize about myself. I mean, I have a strong Sun in my 5th house, which is Lord of my 10th and my 5th, which I always thought was giving me a lot of power in career on some level, or at least, you know, prominence. And at the same time, it's also because Saturn Atmakaraka is, you know, looking at the Sun sign of exaltation in my chart, that it's getting a lot of the Sun's power. And so you find Saturn Atmakaraka people can be stars. And Lucille Ball was a big star, even though the debilitated Atmakaraka it may have hurt her health eventually. You know, she wore herself down. She died in a Saturn Atmakaraka period, but she, you know, it can make people stars also because of the Sun energy. The Sun and Saturn are opposite each other. I don't know if that's clear. Let me ask, see if you got that. Any questions?
No, we're good so far. Yeah, the questions that pop out in my mind, I did ask you already.
Okay. So famous Atmakaraka stars, again, Vanessa Redgrave, John McCain. John McCain was a senator from Arizona for many, many years. Aquarius riding with Saturn Atmakaraka, and Aquarius looking at Leo. I mean, he was Vanessa Redgrave, Saturn Atmakaraka in Aquarius looking at Leo. So you can see how, here's Vanessa Redgrave's chart. Her exalted, she had a lot of political problems. Aquarians are always into society. She had all these political causes. She got fired because of all these political causes. So she had a lot of problems learning about work, but Saturn has a lot of dignity in Aquarius. The energy of the exalted Saturn, or the Saturn in Aquarius looking at Leo, made her a star, because the west is looking to the east. It takes on the east energy. And Saturn Atmakaraka pulls the energy of the sun here. John McCain also, I don't know if I think I have his chart here. John McCain also, same chart, interesting, almost. He's got Saturn in Aquarius Atmakaraka. He's got Sun in Leo. So again, Saturn's looking at the sun. He's all into political power. Okay, now let's move on and say, how do we diagnose the Atmakaraka? So we said we look at dignity, we look at house, we look at we'll look at the navamsha chart. Even we can look at what nakshatra it's in, the lessons that the soul has to learn. We can also look at aspects and planets conjunct the Atmakaraka, and all these things will tell us more specific information about the lessons of the Atmakaraka. So every detail on the chart will reveal something about the nature of the planet, and in this case, the Atmakaraka. We always forget that about Vedic astrology. It's encyclopedic. Every degree, every nuance tells us something about the person. So sign, houses, yogas, aspects, placement in the D9 and Varga charts, what pada the Atmakaraka it's in, what nakshatra it's in. And I find it very important to talk about the Atmakaraka in every consultation, because there's so much we learn about the purpose of this incarnation. So one of the things that we can start with is just, what house is the Atmakaraka in the Rashi sign? Is it exalted, debilitated? Does it have dignity? We saw Vanessa Redgrave, has got Saturn in Aquarius, got a lot of dignity there. So, I mean, it gives it a lot of power in administration. We saw how it managed, in being a freedom fighter. Again, so if the Atmakaraka is Vergotama, it brings the blessings of Shiva and Vishnu, so it brings a lot of strength. We really like Vergotama Atmakarakas, and we also like them exalted and in their own sign. They have a lot of strength to complete their mission. We saw that with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. We went over that chart already. Again, it's in the 9th house. It's retrograde, it's exalted. It is Bhattaka, and there's some Bhattaka planets. I gave a lecture on your channel on Bhattaka. Bhattaka 9th house can have problems with religion or with their fathers, and I believe she did have a lot of challenges with her father. I think it also may have been that he died in the Holocaust. I can't remember. There's something in her biography, but Saturn owns what houses does the Atmakaraka own? Well, in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's house, let me pull that up again so it's not so abstract here. So here's her chart again. So Aquarius owns the 12th and the 1st. The 12th house is about death. So she was kind of totally fascinated about death in her life, and she was a great teacher and counselor with Jupiter in the 1st house. Saturn owns the 1st and the 12th house, so the Atmakaraka has great lessons to learn about death and dying, and that's what she spent her life doing, and helping others learn about death and dying. And then Venus aspecting Saturn, and we have a Gemini aspect from Taurus to Libra here. And Venus is in Saturn's in Gemini Navamsha, so she ended up writing the Atmakaraka is in Gemini, so she ended up writing about death and writing numerous wonderful books on death and dying. So very powerful. And Venus, the Venus aspect, Venus is the best planet for her, or the fourth in its own sign, fourth house. So she was able to deal, she had a lot of happiness in her own life, was able to deal with some of the Saturn Atmakaraka issues more easily with the Venus aspect. Okay. Okay. So what house is the Atmakaraka in? So that's the easiest thing to remember. If the Atmakaraka goes to the 9th house, then we have issues with father and gurus, with religion. If it's in the 7th house, we may suffer from marriage or partnership, business partnership. If we have Atmakaraka in the 6th house, we may have constant litigations and people fighting with us at work, or problems with health issues. We have Atmakaraka in the 12th house, we may have issues about humiliation, loss, and moving abroad. Conjunction of the Atmakaraka with the lords of other houses will bring suffering also. So that answers your question. If the Atmakaraka is conjunct another planet, it may spoil it. So let's say you have a strong Jupiter, but it's conjunct the Atmakaraka, and the Atmakaraka has an 8th house tinge to it. So it may spoil that Jupiter a little bit and bring problems with gurus or problems with teachers or some, depending, again, we have to look at it more microscopically. Or it may bring, Atmakaraka conjunct Jupiter may bring suffering from children. So again, the Atmakaraka can impact the Karaka with the conjunction. Lucille Ball again. She had a tumultuous alcoholic marriage problem. Her romance was always fighting. Mars, Rahu, Saturn. I mean, look at that chart again. It's quite intriguing. Again, not a lot of happiness in marriage life. I mean, she has Jupiter in the 11th. It's Nyatikaraka in Chinese astrology, but she and her husband made lots and lots of money, Lord of the 7th and the 11th, multi-millions of dollars from their television studios and things like that. Extremely wealthy woman. Money was not the issue with this Atmakaraka, but just continual work, suffering with children, romance, alcoholism in the marriage, just really kind of difficult. Here's a case of Bill Walton. He's got Saturn Atmakaraka in the 4th house. A great basketball player with the Portland Trail Blazers, and he was, he's got a very interesting Atmakaraka. Now, normally we don't really, what do we know about Saturn in the 4th house? Well, it spoils domestic life. It spoils happiness. His first wife divorced him. He was always too busy with his basketball. And that's a very painful thing to go through. He also had many sports injuries. In Gemini astrology, the dual signs aspect each other. So Saturn has a full aspect to Mars here for causing accidents in the 7th house. Rahu's also aspecting Saturn, giving him a lot of anxiety. But there were only he may have had 20 seasons as a basketball player, but only 2 of those was he in the full season. He was out all the time for injuries. He had a knee injury. Again, that's Capricorn. But Saturn Atmakaraka brings suffering. It brings health issues. And even though Saturn Atmakaraka here is very, it has a lot of Svergotama in the Navamsha chart. So that really kind of strengthens it, and that gives a lot of soul mission. He did have a second happy marriage, but again, a lot of suffering with health with Saturn Atmakaraka. Nakshatras in Atmakaraka. Now, this could take a whole hour if we did it right, because your viewers know nakshatras well, I can very quickly go over it, but I'm probably not going to do justice to it. What nakshatra is the Atmakaraka in? Is the Atmakaraka coloring the destiny? I find that the mythology of the nakshatra deity will play out in the person's life extensively. And you can think of an Atmakaraka in Jeshta having problems with being a great leader and possibly falling, or having infidelity problems, and you see these Atmakarakas play out with the nakshatra lord's mythology. Quite fascinating. And you can look at the Navamsha Pada. Is the nakshatra in a moksha, kama, or dharma, or artha pada? It's telling you a lot about the mission of the soul, maybe the lessons it needs to learn about moksha, kama, dharma, and artha. Again, this really needs an hour lecture, and I have to go over it quickly. I was going to do my chart, but I'm going to be shy here and move on. But anyway, I just realized I can't really. But I think the fascinating thing about where the Atmakaraka is that look at the deity, look at the mythology of the deity, and see if how afflicted the Atmakaraka planet is, and how difficult the lessons and parallels are between the nakshatra mythology and the person's life are. And you'll find that it's just incredible, incredibly powerfully there. And again, that's probably a 2-hour lesson sometime. I don't know if I've done enough research. Dr. Pai could do that lesson for us. What do you think? I just unmuted you.
Sure, we can do another session on that itself.
Sometimes that would take me a long time to put together, but it's quite fascinating. But anyway, sometime it'd be fun. This stuff is very fascinating. Okay, what position does the Atmakaraka hold in the Navamsha chart in the D9? What planet is it conjunct in the D9? What kind of Rashi, Drishti, or Jaimini aspects are there? We'll look at my chart for this one because I just know it well enough. This is my Navamsha chart. It's Leo rising. My Atmakaraka is Saturn, and Saturn is with Rahu and Venus in Gemini. Now, Gemini is a very sexual sign. Anyway, Venus in Gemini is very sexual. Venus Rahu is very sexual. Saturn is kind of curbing the sexuality there. So I actually I've had a lot of lessons around this in my adolescence and in my college years. But in the end, it was, I did rise to the higher value of Saturn and move more toward meditation rather than. But I have a lot of creative energy. Again, this is Gemini. Okay, the 11th. I've written 5 books on Vedic astrology, and I have this is the Atmakaraka. Just even being placed in Gemini is giving me that kind of deep soul energy to write these very soulful books about Vedic astrology. This is complicated, and I don't want to go over time. There's a whole lesson we could do on the Atmakaraka and the Navamsha chart. It tells us a lot about the lessons of the person. I find out I don't end up using it as much. The one that I use most is you don't want the Atmakaraka in the 6th or the 8th house in the Navamsha chart, because then you have vexing problems which are hard to solve, health issues, domestic issues. But for most part, the Atmakaraka will do well in all the other houses in the Navamsha chart except the 6th or the 8th chart, and then it has many challenges from past life, and it has to propitiate Saturn. Nakshatra we talked a little bit about. Atmakaraka in the Varga charts. Now this is kind of advanced, but the Atmakaraka is so important that wherever it goes in the Varga chart will be very kind of revealing about the karma of that Varga. So if the Atmakaraka is poorly placed in, okay, the D10 chart, of course, is for career and status in the world. And if the Atmakaraka, you know, Atmakaraka always brings kind of karmic lessons. If the Atmakaraka is poorly placed in the D10 chart, let's say in the first house, or if it's a malefic, or if it's in a difficult house like the sixth house, then it can kind of create problems for that Varga. Here's John McCain's Dashamsha chart. John McCain, again, former senator of Arizona that just died a couple years ago. You know, he's got Saturn Atmakaraka and Scorpio in the sixth house, you know, and I mean, most politicians are always battling, but you know, when you think of John McCain's life and what he went through, particularly in his later years, you know, you can see that Saturn Atmakaraka still gave up even until he died, was giving incredible deep lessons, you know, fighting, you know, the way he was fighting, you know, in government, and because, you know, yes, we could say Saturn in the sixth, you know, Saturn in the sixth house is not so great in the G10 chart, but the Atmakaraka is just creating this incredible kind of political ups and downs there. Vanessa Redgrave also here. I don't have her navamsha chart here. I don't have her. Okay, I have a couple of interesting. I have Jeff Bezos. So Capricorn Atmakaraka, I'm sorry, if you have, there's certain signs of the zodiac that are more charged. Capricorn, Aquarius, and Scorpio, if you have them in your, any planets you have in your natal chart there, in your Varga charts, they have deeper karma. Capricorn, deep suffering, hard work. Aquarius, you know, co-owned by Saturn and Rahu, brings deep suffering. Also, Scorpio always, you know, is always a mess because it's the natural eighth sign of the zodiac. It always brings deep karma from past lives and things like that. So when you have the Atmakaraka in Capricorn, Aquarius, or Scorpio, it tends to bring more suffering and more karma to work on. We saw that with Vanessa Redgrave. But let's look at Jeff Bezos. We don't have his time. Jeff Bezos, of course, is one of the wealthiest people in the world, not any longer because of Elon Musk, but because of his of ownership of Amazon. He recently retired. We're guessing that he's Aries rising. He's got an exalted Mars in the 10th with Saturn in its own sign, Atmakaraka. We can get a lot of bald people with Aries rising, as you know. So we're guessing that Jeff, we don't have his time, but we're guessing Aries rising here. But Saturn Atmakaraka is in Capricorn with the exalted Mars. Now, this is complicated. If you remember, Amazon had this huge scandal about underpaying its workers, paying them $15 an hour, not letting them take bathroom breaks. Jeff was fighting the unionization of his workers and things like that. So again, here's somebody who probably has a lesson to learn. Saturn Atmakaraka has to learn how to treat employees better. I know that in this case, in the 10th house career, Mars is afflicting it, even though it's the chart lord and it's exalted. I don't know if he's learned those lessons. I don't think Amazon has changed their employee practices. I think maybe they're getting better wages now, and maybe they're getting bathroom breaks. But you can see how that karma is kind of working out there. And again, it's Capricorn, Atmakaraka and Capricorn. Jeff Bezos worked incredibly hard. It's not, you know, we know him as this incredible titan now, but you know, when his company was just a bookseller, you know, unbelievable what he went through to build his company. So he had lots of, but Saturn had the ability to work hard in Capricorn as the Atmakaraka and probably and be successful. And the exalted Mars, Lord, you know, with that incredible yoga, Mars exalted in the 10th for Aries, and just being very powerful for his achievement. say Aquarius Atmakaraka is often difficult because Saturn co-owns Rahu and Saturn, and we have the life of Hermann Hesse here, one of my childhood authors. Hermann Hesse was a German author. He got the Nobel Prize in 1949 for the glass bead game. In the 60s, he was an icon of the hippie generation for books like Siddhartha and Steppenwolf and Damien, and you know, we read, you know, as a 60s hippie person, and we loved all his books. A very difficult life. Saturn Atmakaraka with Mars and Rahu in the 4th house in Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is particularly karmic. Saturn, even being in its own sign, is karmic, but he was a lifelong alcoholic. I mean, he eventually did get the Nobel Prize. He wrote, you know, probably 25, 30 books. But a very difficult life. Saturn, you know, Rahu has dignity there also. Mars is the chart lord, along with Ketu. 4th house of happiness, you know, just, you know, I think he had an extremely difficult relationship with his mother, Saturn Atmakaraka, you know, you can imagine in the 4th house, even though there's dignity there. But I think he was a lifelong alcoholic and very difficult life with Saturn in Aquarius and 2 afflictions to the Atmakaraka. Vanessa Redgrave, also Saturn Atmakaraka in Aquarius. In this case, she has a little, in Diagnosing Astrology, Libra aspects, Aquarius, so she has a Mars aspect to her Saturn Atmakaraka, but Saturn Atmakaraka is at the end of the sign here, and Jupiter's nakshatra. She had a lot of conflicts. I mean, she would do all these political. She was an environmental activist and animal activist, and she was revolutionary. She would get into trouble in a lot of her films because she was becoming this controversial activist, which is something of Saturn in Aquarius. I think the Mars just kind of made it more intense. I don't think it creates a lot of peace. I think you get the, you know, we look up to Vanessa Redgrave as this incredible actress. You know, she got a number of Oscars and Oscar nominations. Amazing person with humanitarian work, and you know, there's just a lot of suffering there. Okay, so I don't want to go too much longer. We've gone 70 minutes, and you know, all this material is kind of endless. Those of you who are interested in my work, you know, please visit appliedvedicastrology.com. You can email me at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com. I do consultations. I teach classes. I have over 50 canned classes. My next live class, which starts on September 10th or 11th, Finding Your Blind Spots Using Vedic Astrology, about unconscious patterns. And it's much bigger than my book. My book kind of outlines a couple things. It's really the title I use for my book, but the class that's coming up is very powerful. Thank you for having me. Did you any closing comments and questions here before we end up here? Let me unmute you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, so I'm having trouble unmuting you. Let's see. I'm going to make you the presenter here. So you can take the mic, and you've got the camera if you want to say anything in closing. And I've got to unmute you again. I don't know what happened. So can you find that orange mic and change it to green? Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Barry. That was wonderful presentation. Sorry, and quite in details, which is really, really nice. I mean, if one wants to really decode it and really go into different layers, I think it's really interesting. I think we should do another session, how it is manifesting in D9. I think that'll be really, really interesting.
Yeah, that would be easier for me to do. The interesting thing about Atmakaraka, I don't find that anybody talks about it enough. And I've been watching it for 8 or 9 years and just looking at people's charts. And I actually want to do a whole course in Atmakaraka where you spend like 1 week on every Atmakaraka. So you have Mercury Atmakaraka with all the examples, and Saturn Atmakaraka with all the examples, and Moon Atmakaraka with all the examples, because you see all the different colorations. And we tried to cover that with nakshatra, padas, aspects, dignity,
Yeah.
and it, like everything in Vedic astrology, it's encyclopedic.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
thanks for having me. Love to Dr. Pai, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
I'm going to end, I guess, and then I'll send you the video tape.
So I don't know.